Dr. Dana Tassone with participants in HFT 6228, graduate course in hospitality and tourism management. In last week's clip, I told you that we had completed the entire foundation for the course. The first 4, 5 chapters presented the whys, and the rest of the chapters presented to you the whats. Why do we do what we do, and what do we do? From this point on, the remaining chapters identify specific topic areas that are required areas of proficiency for hospitality human resource managers, all human resource managers. In fact, the remaining topics, if one were to pursue a graduate degree, a specialized graduate degree in HR with a business school, the remaining 3 chapters provide summaries of what would be required courses for an MS in HR. And so the chapter we're talking about today is organizational communications. In your program, there's an entire course available to you on this topic, and of course this chapter summarizes that course. And communications, I wish I had a buck where every time I said that communications is the #1 tool in a manager's toolbox. You can know all that there is to know about management, but if a person lacks the ability to effectively communicate, he or she cannot possibly be an effective manager. And so the HR person must be proficient in the area of organizational communications to teach those skills to other practicing managers. Also, HRM consists of, as I've said 100 zillion times, internal marketing, where marketing focuses on the external environment, HR focuses on marketing to the internal environment. And in both functions, communications is key. Also, HR practitioners are the ones responsible for documenting and communicating all of those strategic factors to members of the organization. Objectives, strategies, policies, standards, procedures, and rules. And so the chapter presents to you one version of what's known as the communications model. And it's figure 12.1, and it charts the specific flow of what happens in a single communication between 2 or more individuals. And this was established quite some time ago, I think in the 1950s, by a good researcher, Ralph Nichols. And we take for granted that, you say something, I listen, and then I respond. We see it as very simplistic, but it really isn't. It's a very involved process. So the communications model just charts those things out. Now, I'm sure you know that the single most important communication skills are listening skills, and a list of aspects involved in those kinds of skills appears on page 166. Numerous studies have been done concerning listening effectiveness among managers, and bottom line is the point of congruence among all those studies is that listening skills are the predominant skills for managers, yet the least taught. I never heard of a course in listening, have you? I've heard of a course in organizational communications that includes a module in listening, but the research shows that executives, effective executives, spend 85% of their time in listening mode for a number of reasons. And the number one of those reasons would be to access vital information about the status of the organizations that they're running. For this purpose, we teach a process called active listening, and it's explained in detail in the chapter. And one of the aspects of listening that exists that we sometimes overlook, but they're there if we enhance our awareness, are barriers to effective listening. When we teach active listening, we will walk a group of individuals that we're training through scenarios that demonstrate the barriers that exist for effective listening. And when you read those descriptions, you'll visualize scenarios whereby you can recall these happening in action. And in no particular order, but one of the barriers are people. I see this all the time. People who are sitting there looking at you with a relatively neutral expression, and they're not really listening to what you're saying. What they're doing is they're planning their response, just waiting for you to finish. One researcher said, a pretty funny line, one researcher said that in those cases you have two individuals engaged in a monologue only to have the first person take a breath so that the other person can talk. And in the end of the conversation, all they've heard is what they've said, themselves, not what the other person said. And there are lots of others, mood, experience, all those factors that can pass judgment on the expectations for communications, who a person is, would fall under the experience. There are people that you know of that there's whatever they have to say, your experience with that person will prevent you from even hearing them. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard was famous for saying, "Who you are shouts so loudly in my ears that I can't hear a word you say." Lack of attention, common with bosses. You walk into a boss's office. You have something important that you want to share with that particular person, and you're sitting there, and he or she is shuffling papers and answering the phone. Obviously, that person's not hearing what the individual is saying. And then there are two forms of communication within organizations. There is the official set of communications called the formal communications network, and there are those aspects of communication that are not necessarily required by the organization, and those are called informal communications. Sometimes people confuse the two issues, but anything that is purposefully pushed through the pipeline within the organizational structure is a formal communication, and those types of communication that occur as a sidebar or as a commentary or as a social interaction. Those are informal communications. And which one outweighs the other? And the answer is they're both equally important. And a classic example of informal communications is what we call the grapevine, the rumor mill called the grapevine. And one study indicated that there was an inverse relationship between the effectiveness of the formal communications in organizations and the effectiveness and efficiency and accuracy of the grapevine, whereby when formal lines of communications became less effective, the grapevine became more effective, and in some cases cited in these studies, the grapevine was as effective as 85% accuracy and speed relative to the formal lines of communication. And you've, I'm sure, been taught that communication is not majorly consistent of verbal interactions. Studies indicate that only 7% of communications has to do with the actual words used. The other 93% have to do with what is called nonverbal communications. And these include tonation, body language, volume, facial expressions, posturing, a whole list of things that are inside the chapter. And then the important thing to understand with communications is that is the flow of communications. So you picture, and you have a figure in the book, I think it's 12.2, and the book shows you an organizational chart, and you have the directions of communication. And you'll see from that chart that they can go laterally, they can go vertically, they can go diagonally, they can go in all different directions. And the reason that HR people must be the proficient organizational communicators is that they are the ones responsible for daily internal communications as well as formal documented external communications. And it is them, because they are internal marketers, it is them who are frequently called upon to present to large groups of people, the entire employee populace, or the community, or the shareholders, or other aspects of the stakeholder group. And then the chapter concludes with management information systems exclusive to the human resource function, and that field is still known as HRIS, Human Resource Information Systems, and you're more than aware that all the functions that we already talked about are frequently implemented vis-a-vis digital systems through intranets and extranets. And so that's the nutshell for organization communications relative to the HR function. And that brings us to the end of what we need to talk about today. And I'll see you in the next clip.